Now that it's the 40th year since the original Super Mario Bros. Entry on the NES was released, I thought it'd be a great idea to make a video honoring that wonderful timeless classic, as it's truly responsible for changing the video game industry for the better. Over the decades, Nintendo has re-released this title in several different ways, in several different places. Where in studying this, it gave me the idea to focus on these unique versions in creating today's video about the 35 different versions of Super Mario Bros. Oh yeah, before we get started on this, my name is Copycat, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel, hitting that bell to stay notified when I upload new videos. To start, we're obviously going to talk about that introductory entry, Super Mario Bros. They came out for both the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985, skyrocketing in popularity due to the game's innovative platforming mechanics and memorable characters, leading to over 40 million copies sold worldwide. Because of this, Mario, and by extension Nintendo, would become a household name almost overnight, leading to dozens of sequels and almost 100 spin-off titles by this point. You know that this game is great as people to this day still play it quite religiously. And because of that, different versions are still being made, which is why this video is actually going to be pretty long, just wait and see. In 1986, Nintendo would create an add-on to their Famicom called the Famicom Disk System, which instead of cartridges, used a sort of floppy disk to play the games, while also upgrading the RAM to boost operations, as well as adding an FM synthesizer chip that allowed for more realistic sound. Of course, as a launch title, they had to do a re-release of Super Mario Bros., which definitely looks a bit different than the original, but otherwise I believe everything else stayed the same, although I really couldn't find too much info about it online. However, one thing that I did find is that they changed the Minus World glitch, which is a place that can be gotten to by breaking these bricks by the end pipe of World 1-2, then by crouch jumping into the wall, where if done right, you'll get forced through to the other side to the warp area. Here, then go down the pipe, and you'll now appear in a corrupted underwater area only designated as -1 or Minus World, which cannot be completed as entering the end pipe sends you right back to the beginning. However, in the Famicom Disk version, you're instead sent to a hybrid water/athletic stage, being able to swim through the sky and see some crazy things like interesting color palettes, enemies that don't belong, Princess Peach sort of just chilling there in midair, and for a split second, even Bowser, although he disappears very quickly. What's interesting is that you can actually complete this level and move on to the next World -2, which actually randomly is just World 7-3, where after you complete that, you then go to World -3, which is just World 4-4, but now invaded by bloopers, which actually makes it tougher. Also, the maze mechanic here has been disabled, and the Bowser at the end is gone, so you simply just have to hit the axe to rescue no one actually in the end. Once you complete this, the game thinks that you've beaten it, and allows you to select levels as well as enter hard mode. Meaning technically this might be the fastest way in completing the original game, but unfortunately it's not something that's recognized by speedrun.com. Just a month later in March of 1986, Nintendo would add Super Mario Bros. To its two-player oriented versus arcade system, likely as a move to further promote the game and draw in people to buy the NES. This, however, was a drastically different experience as it had a much higher difficulty, way less power-ups, changing of platform locations, and an increased amount of enemies. Most likely done as obviously arcades need to make money, so this ensures players will die way more. Also, a whole bunch of levels are mixed around, and ones are added from the lost levels, Super Mario Bros. 2 Japan only release, which must have been trippy to Westerners as that game would only come out here later in Super Mario All-Stars. Also, the two-player mode acts the exact same as it does in the OG game, which sort of is a drag as co-op multiplayer Mario in the 1980s would have been awesome, but oh well, we never got that. In June of 1986, Nintendo would adapt the NES game into a Game & Watch device aptly titled Super Mario Bros. Although really, it's a completely different game, due in part to the rudimentary 4-bit graphics this system could produce. Here, the gameplay revolves around completing 8 auto-scrolling stages with 3 lives, ensuring you don't fall into a void, while also having to worry about enemies like the hammer-throwing Lakitus and the bullet bills that try and stop you. In the Crystal Series version, which is unique as you play it on a see-through screen, you can see that Mario appears more like his Game & Watch style, but eventually an updated widescreen version would be released in 1988 with sharper graphics and a more modern-looking Mario. There's also a super rare Japanese special edition where there were only 10,000 made, which also sported those updated graphics. And even though these are kinda cool, in 2025 they sort of feel underwhelming, and it having an in-grain clock function isn't enough to sway me. After the massive success of the Versus System cabinets, Nintendo would create the Playchoice 10 in 1986, bringing NES titles to arcades including Mario titles like Dr. Mario, Golf, Mario Bros, Mario's Open Golf, and Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3. These direct ports were meant to be an advertisement for those who might not be able to play a specific game they wanted, as well as it being a way to promote new releases, which honestly was a great idea. Apparently there were 53 games available for this cabinet, with 10 being able to be installed at a time. So some machines could actually be different than others, allowing for a lot of variety. Up next is probably the most confusing version of Super Mario Bros., especially for Westerners, in Night Nippon, a specialty game created to honor the radio station with the same name. The gameplay is essentially just Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, but with a lot of character/enemy retools to have them appear like radio DJs, and power-up/item ones to have things more associated with their shows. Although, as someone sitting here in Canada, I have no idea of any of the context behind any of this, so I'm not even going to try to go in depth or explain it, because I just can't. I will say though that apparently only 3,040 of these Famicom discs exist, making them somewhat rare, costing you at least a few $100s on eBay if you want one for yourself. Also, I have to know how Peach wears a more traditional Japanese princess outfit. Just something I thought was cool and hope we see again one day. It wouldn't be until 1987 when Super Mario Bros. Would finally be available in Europe and Australia, having for logistical reasons a slightly different version of the game, as Mario's movement speed is increased and enemies have larger hitboxes, making everything actually kinda harder. This was all because they were using a video format in their televisions called PAL, or Phase Alternate Line, meaning not only were the game's colors worse, but there was also a frame rate issue that made the game feel slower. So without those changes, this wouldn't be that much of an enjoyable experience. They also fixed the underwater glitches that you can do in World 2.2 and 5.2, filling in the block above the pipe so you can no longer crouch into them and get stuck in the wall. Other than that, everything's pretty much the same. Next, we're going to look at a combined 2-in-1 game in the Super Mario Bros. / Duck Hunt cartridge, made available in the Nintendo Entertainment System Action Set that came out in November of 1988. From this specific bundle on, Nintendo would always add the first entry to them, also keeping in Duck Hunt as both it and the Zapper peripheral have always come with the system, as clearly you can't play the game without it. Nothing changes at all to the gameplay of either game, which really just leaves the convenience of having two games in one, as this title's sort of gimmick, I guess. One of the most interesting versions of this Mario title can be played on something called a Nelsonic Game Watch, made in collaboration with Nintendo and that company in 1989. Although it really is quite different, as the plot revolved around saving the princess who's been captured by the evil witch, that you never see by the way, and is guarded by a Koopa dragon. Yeah. The gameplay is super rudimentary as it is still a watch, and in my opinion, even though it might look cool, I don't think playing this would be that much fun. In 1990, Nintendo would release an NES bundle called the Power Set, which added the Power Pad and a title called World Class Track Meet into the mix. So now instead of a 2-in-1, we have a 3-in-1 game. Now, if you didn't guess, World Class Track Meet uses the Power Pad as its controller to complete different events, a definitive precursor to the DDR pads that would become popular years later. This game has a very complex history, as its first go around in North America was an utter failure, being released as a game called Stadium Events that used something called the Family Fun Fitness Mat, made by Bondi apparently, which didn't sell well at all during its release, and with there already being a limited amount of units made, this has now become one of the rarest video games of all time. If you go on eBay right now, you can own it for yourself for $40,000 US. Something that probably isn't worth it, but if you're somehow a millionaire collector, maybe you can get this for yourself, I don't know. Next up, we're going to look at the Nintendo World Championships 1990s cartridge, which is a game that was specifically used in that event when Nintendo toured the United States in 1990. Players were required to compete against each other in Rad Racer, Tetris, and obviously, Super Mario Bros., albeit in a modified version where players had to collect 50 coins in the fastest amount of time possible. Because this was a cartridge that wasn't meant for commercial public release, it's quite expensive if you want to buy it for yourself, where you're going to have to spend at least tens of thousands of dollars to get it. Oh yeah, and the winners of the championship for each category, along with the select lucky few, were given a super duper rare gold version, which can also cost oodles of money if you're an avid collector. Sometimes I sort of wish I was a millionaire so I could buy all these things, but unfortunately right now I'm just a broke YouTuber with a pipe dream. Another 3-in-1 Nintendo will release, but for European markets, is the one that has Super Mario Bros., Tetris, and Nintendo World Cup on the same cartridge, which if you didn't know is just a soccer game. I'm not sure if this was alongside a console as a set or not, but either way, it's technically another version that was made, so I at least have to mention here. If you do know the origins of this, then please let me know in the comments below, as I couldn't find much info. In 1993, Nintendo ingeniously brought Super Mario Bros. To the SNES with the Super Mario All-Stars collection, which included the original NES trilogy, as well as a game called The Lost Levels, which actually is the true Japanese sequel to the original, not released in North America mainly because it was deemed too frustrating. This version brings in many changes like updating the backgrounds with additional artwork, adding different level features like snow although it doesn't affect your gameplay, an improvised color palette and just more colors overall, a few scenes with the princess being slightly upgraded, and Luigi being a much more distinct character rather than just looking like a clone of Mario. Also, certain glitches were removed. Probably by accident, as I doubt Nintendo cared too much, but who knows. 1 year later, the company would offer a Super Mario All-Stars collection that now included Super Mario World, being a cartridge that was shipped with the purchase of the Super Nintendo, which is really just a way for them to try and sell the system more. To be honest, I had no idea this was even a thing that existed, as I didn't have a copy of this game and I didn't even know anybody else who had it, so maybe not too many people bought this. A version of the game that was actually sort of ahead of its time is the BS Super Mario Collection that was made available through the Super Famicom Satellaview add-on, that sort of connected users to a very rudimentary internet all the way back in 1997. Through this you were able to download games, access other amenities, as well as play in real-time events with other players on a weekly basis, including this one that started things off with Super Mario Bros. The playthrough of this included special music, funny cutscenes, and cameos from Japanese celebrities, as well as a few minigames like the Spade Panel one that's usually found in Super Mario Bros. 3. I don't think too many people play this as it was region locked to Japan, and the Satellaview didn't sell well at all. So I appreciate there's at least some gameplay footage out there, otherwise this really could have been lost to time. Nintendo would eventually bring the classic game over to the Game Boy in their Super Mario Bros. Deluxe release in 1999, changing the game a lot from what we're used to, some for the better and some for the worse. One thing that sticks out immediately is how small the Game Boy's play screen is, meaning you can't really see much of the level you're in, and at times this can actually make certain parts of stages much tougher, specifically athletic ones where there's a lot of voids to fall into. Other glaring changes are the tighter physics to Mario's movements, having 5 lives instead of 3, a few color changes, many glitches that were fixed including the minus world, the fact you can save, which I'm kinda surprised by, the music, which is actually worse as the Game Boy had notoriously bad sound, and the weirdest thing to me is the overworld map, which looks so out of place it almost hurts my eyes. One of the most surprising places that a variant of the game can be found in is through the GameCube's Dobatsu no Mori Plus, also known as Animal Forest or Animal Crossing. As in it, there's an in-game NES console/cartridge that you can actually play a full game of, offering 21 of those old titles that you could actually get for yourself. Now, not everybody had access to Super Mario Bros., however, as it was only made available through a contest in Japan's Famitsu magazine. where 30 lucky winners were given a specialty memory card containing the game. Meaning if you had one of these legit ones, that could fetch you some real dough. Now I say legit as people have found glitched ways over the years to add it to their games and play it for themselves, as there is no contest to get this in North America within Animal Crossing. So as a completionist, you really have no other option at that point. In 2003, Nintendo in Japan ran a campaign to promote the NES classic games coming to the Game Boy Advance, and called it the Hot Mario Campaign, where the winners were given a Famicom-themed system, as well as a prototype version of that ported classic. I'm not sure of any major differences between the original, the version that was given out, and the final product, other than apparently an unused game over animation, although I couldn't find any footage of it. I can't really talk about this too much more as there's scarce information out there about it, so if you happen to have a copy of this, then please let me know. A year later in 2004 would be the worldwide release of the NES Classic series of games for the Game Boy Advance, and with it came Super Mario Bros., being a direct ported version so there weren't any changes made to the gameplay. Apparently the biggest difference was with the game's resolution, as it had to be altered to make them work on the Game Boy Advance, making the graphics look almost squished. But otherwise, everything else was kept the same, even Minus World, which is kind of a surprise. This also notes one of the first times the game was released in North America before Japan, as they were holding out for Mario's 20th anniversary to have it come out as a celebration marker instead. With the release of the Wii in 2006, Nintendo also came out with an online shop that allowed you to buy and download past titles directly to your system called the Virtual Console, with Super Mario Bros. Being made available by Christmas of that year. This again was a direct port of the original, but is apparently one of the worst versions to speedrun, as the loading times between levels are much longer than normal. Now, I'm not 100% sure why this is the case, but either way, as a kid I was at least ecstatic to play these old titles, as by that time my NES had broken, and emulators weren't really that huge of a thing yet, so this is really where I got my fix. One place I didn't even know had a version of Super Mario Bros. In it is Super Smash Bros. Brawl for the Wii, where in this 2006 title, you can play demos of classic Mario entries called Masterpieces. I guess it's a bit to try and get you to buy them for your Virtual Console. Now, these are just demos, so a time limit was added to each one, where you really only can play between 1 and 2 minutes before you get kicked out, meaning you'll probably only play through a few levels, which is a bit of a letdown, but I get companies need to make money somehow. Even Nintendo, who's a multi-billion-dollar corporation. In 2010, Nintendo will release a limited edition of Super Mario All-Stars for the Wii in celebration of the franchise's 25th anniversary, which really is just an unaltered emulation port of the original SNES collection, but added a few extra goodies to entice fans to buy it. This was a CD of mini songs from many of the games in the mainline series, a booklet showing the history of the franchise from 1985 up until that point, and a cute letter from Peach sort of thanking you for supporting her and encouraging you to play through each game. Unfortunately, this came out during my broke era, so I couldn't afford it, because trust me, I would have bought this and maybe wouldn't even have opened it because that's how much of a nerd I am. Also in celebration of 25 years of our mustachioed hero, Nintendo would come out with an anniversary edition of the original game, which doesn't change much except the question mark blocks, which now have the number 25 inscribed on them. In North America, this was only available through download in the Virtual Console eShop, but everywhere else it seems to have been included as a game alongside the limited edition Red Wii, where here, only a copy of New Super Mario Bros. Wii was added, which is a bit of a letdown to collectors as I wouldn't go that out of my way to get it. If you had bought a 3DS before it dropped in price in 2012, Nintendo gave you the opportunity to download a ported version of Super Mario Bros. For free. A great touch for fans, as companies aren't always willing to give away games for nothing. Well, I guess not nothing, you had to buy the system, but you get what I mean. For those who bought the console at a later date, the game would become available on the eShop for around $4.99 USD, including eventually releasing a port of Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, that Game Boy version that we had talked about earlier. Once the Wii U came out in November of 2012, it was only a matter of time until Super Mario Bros. Became available on the system's Virtual Console. Again, costing around $5 to purchase, something I ended up getting because I am a sucker. What was even more interesting, however, was the system's eShop-only NES Remix game, which took elements from that classic system and turned things on their head. making you complete over 200 unique challenges that are more interactive than just playing a ported version of the full titles. Again, these aren't full games, but snippets of each one where you have to complete very specific things to move on. For example, like collecting all the coins before time runs out, or defeating certain enemies in a certain amount of time, or even needing to get 10 1-ups in a row by performing the Infinite Lives exploit. Either way you look at it, this is a great switch up that changes things up just enough to remain fresh. Now, a sequel to this would eventually be made in 2014 as an eShop exclusive that didn't include Super Mario Bros. As one of its classic challenge games, but instead included a game mode titled Super Luigi Bros, which is made in celebration for the Year of Luigi, aka the character's 30th anniversary since its debut. This is intriguing as it's a Luigi-centric reimagination of that original game, where the levels are actually mirrored, meaning you're platforming from right to left instead of the usual left to right. A really strange experience that almost makes it a new title entirely, that unfortunately I've never had the pleasure of playing. Now, Nintendo would eventually combine these remixes as a physical release titled The Ultimate NES Remix for the 3DS in December of 2014, and with it put in extra content, including a game mode called Speed Mario Bros. This is a modded port of Super Mario Bros. Where everything plays at 2 times speed, which, if you didn't guess, creates an absolutely chaotic experience where at times you feel like you're almost out of control. This game is still available online and pretty cheap if you want to try it out for yourself, as I found a copy on eBay for around $20 to $30, which isn't that bad. Also in 2014, Nintendo will release Super Smash Bros. For both the Wii U and 3DS. That also contained a Masterpiece section within their vaults that once again allowed you to play demos of past classic games. Also again, a time limit was put on each of them, making them more like a demo. But at least here the amount of time you had was at least displayed, so you knew when they were going to end. I guess this is continually put in there as there's always going to be new players, probably young kids, who play these demos over and over, hoping that one day their parents buy it for them, as I definitely was that kid at one point, and I can relate. A game that utilizes Nintendo's Amiibos is a free release called Amiibo Tap, Nintendo's greatest bits for the Wii U, needing to tap the figurines to unlock new screens that let you play through classic hits. For Super Mario Bros., you need to complete World 1 in 180 seconds or 3 minutes, which is definitely possible, being different from the fast-paced remix challenges, where here things are more focused on the original gameplay. As someone who owns a lot of Amiibos, I definitely could make use of this, but if you don't have any, I could see this as being pretty useless. The third most recent version of Super Mario Bros. To come out was the one in the NES Classic Edition mini console, being one of 30 titles shipped alongside it, even including the old school controllers, which is just awesome. There's no change at all to the gameplay, other than the save states which were added in just so that players don't have to struggle through the longer games. This was something the NES just wasn't capable of at the time, so most games opted to either not include it, use codes, or like Zelda, add extra RAM to the cartridge, a highly innovative thing, especially for 1986. In 2018, Nintendo will release an online service with the Nintendo Switch, where with your subscription you gain access to a bunch of old games from older consoles, including the NES, the SNES, the N64, the Game Boy Advance, and randomly the Sega Genesis, which if we were in the 90s and you told me that you could play Sega games on the Nintendo, I would probably call you crazy. Obviously, Super Mario Bros. Is included in the NES section with no changes at all from the original. But there is an added feature that's amazing and changes the way you play in the Rewind one, letting you go back and fix your mistakes by holding ZL and ZR, while just then scrolling backwards with a joystick. As a YouTuber, this is a great thing for trying certain glitches over and over, or re-recording different parts until I get them just right. Something I hope they never take away, but of course, knowing Nintendo, who knows? One of the coolest pieces of hardware that Nintendo's ever released is its newest Game & Watch systems that came out in 2020, launching with the Zelda version as well as a Super Mario Bros. One, letting you play those old school games on an old school inspired device. Here you're given the full NES title, Super Mario Bros. 2, the Lost Levels version, an old Game & Watch entry called Ball, and the built-in clock that plays cool animations depending on what time of day it is. The only real change I noticed is that the system doesn't have a start button or pause button, so you have to press the set button to start everything. Also, only in this version can you hold down the A button for 5 seconds on the title screen and get rewarded with 99 lives. Where otherwise to get these, you have to pull off an infinite 1-up exploit, which isn't easy. The most recent version of the game to come out might actually be one of the best in Super Mario Bros. 35 in 2020, which was a free download for Nintendo Switch Online members in celebration of 35 years since the NES release. This was a fascinating experience as it was a battle royale face-off against 34 other players, with the objective being to be the last person standing. In this, each player has a timer and needs to defeat enemies and collect coins to have it go up, with the foes you defeat getting transported to other players' screens to try and trip them up. Unfortunately, this was a limited game mode, so by April of 2021, it was removed and discontinued, as it was always meant to be a limited time event. Even though everybody liked it and it had a huge player base, so make it make sense, it just doesn't. Alright, that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this kind of long one. If you did, please leave a like, comment below what you thought about it, and of course subscribe to my channel. Hope you guys all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!